Good morning. My name is Diane McAllister. I'm a partner at Public Policy Partners. I'm one of the lobbyists for the system down at the legislature.
And I'm Doug Cole, also one of the contract lobbyists with High Ground for the system. We're going to get through this pretty quick because the legislative process is very complicated, but that's what they have us here for. And then they're actually, they're actually in session right now. Get going here. Is this, do you got to point us somewhere? There it goes. So we're in the 59th day of the legislative session. Arizona has a part-time legislature. They strive to be in session for only 100 days, but last year, and they start in the first Monday in January, but last year they adjourned on July 31st, which was the longest session in state history. So hopefully for our mental state, and we hope that they don't last that long, but today's the 59th day of the session.
Plus they want to get out for their elections.
Exactly, it's also an election year. So 1,629 bills have been introduced. 3 bills have passed, because one passed last night. 1 bill has been vetoed, 1 has been signed, and 1 is waiting the governor's action, which is anticipated that she'll do it. The deadline to hear House bills in the Senate and Senate bills in the House is March 22nd. Why is that significant? Because if a bill doesn't get a hearing, then it's pretty much dead for the session. Appropriations Committee will start after that period of time and start working on the state budget. We have a lot of legislators as we speak right now in the House. 17 of them decided to go to Israel last night. 10 Republicans and 7 Democrats. So that's kind of slowing things down. Next slide. So we're going to head right into our bills. One of the top priority bills for the system is our continuation bill. Under Arizona state law, every state agency, of which PSPRS is a state agency, as you know, they must go through a sunset review process and an audit from the Auditor General. We just completed that back in 2023, and we've had our sunset hearings in both the House and the Senate, which went very well. Usually state agencies get a 8-year continuation. We have a contingent within the state legislature right now that's going for a 2 or 4 year continuation for state agencies. The current status of our continuation bill, which is House Bill 2378 by Representative Neil Carter, who is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, is at 6 years. The ASRS continuation is at 8 years. We are going to hold pretty tight and keep that 6 years, and hopefully, if not more. And I'll turn it over to Diane, and she can talk about our administrative bill.
So every year, PSPRS has to go down to the legislature and have what we call our administrative bill, and that administrative bill makes sure that we stay in compliance with the IRS. So IRS updates their rules, we have to update our statutes because our statutes are our governing rules. And so House Bill 2203 has some of those kind of cleanup items in there that maintain compliance with the IRS, or kind of clean up statutes from previous legislative bills that have passed where maybe something was left out. This has a variety of different provisions in it, and so we'll go over those really quickly. The first of which is for the elected officials defined contribution plan. That's what EOD-CRS stands for. It's the DC plan for the elected officials. When that DC plan, which is the defined contribution plan, was created, they accidentally put in that the interest would be compounded daily and not annually like the rest of the systems in the state, and so we're just updating that to align with the other statutes. Also, when the DC plans were created, or when the supplemental plan was created, the DC plans were not in creation. And when we created those DC plans, or the defined contribution plans, they forgot to add them into those members being allowed to participate in the supplemental plan if they want to. So if somebody wants to put more money away for their retirement in the future. So just making sure that those individuals are allowed to be a part of that. Lateral transfers. I know this is an issue that has had a lot of attention over the last several years. When pension reform was done, One of the issues that was needed to be addressed was when an individual transferred from one employer to another, there was unfunded liability that was being transferred with those individuals in a lot of cases. And so pension reform said that they didn't want unfunded liability going from one employer to the next, that they wanted the first day at employer B to be kind of a clean slate. They put very prescriptive statutes in place for that. This language in here does not change the intent of it, but it does change the accounting of it. With the new public administrative system that we're putting into place, with how it is now is you would have to calculate from each employer at the time of retirement. This basically makes it where when you transfer on that first day, that employer A has to transfer the total amount of assets to cover the amount of liabilities that were created by that employee to employer B. So it's still a clean slate. If they had not performed as well and there's an unfunded, it remains with that employer. Or if you had earned more, that overfunded also stays with that original employer. So you have a clean slate when you get transferred over. So it's just language that's updating how the accounting is done. It doesn't actually change the intent. Escheatment process, which is one of my favorite words this session, but really all it is abandoned monies. The IRS does not allow for when a money enters into the trust like the PSPRS system, that money comes out for any other reason other than the benefits and administration unless it was put in there as an error, and then there's a way to get that out. However, our statutes kind of made it seem that if there was abandoned monies in the system, which does not happen often, but if there were, that the state treasurer's office could get them and it could go into the general fund. That is not in compliance with the IRS. You can't just come in and take money out of the system. And so we clarified that that money would then stay within the PSPRS system. ASRS already had language similar to this. Ours is a little bit more complicated since we have so many plans under our umbrella, but that's what this portion does. And then the last item in the administrative bill is talking about loans against the defined contribution plans. So when the PSPRS defined contribution plan was created and the correctional officers retirement plan defined contribution plan was created, we didn't have any DC plans really in our state statutes for our public employees. And so it was put in there that they could not take loans against those accounts. However, the IRS actually allows for them. Not that it is recommended, but there are sometimes life circumstances that happen where you might need to take a loan. If an individual's spouse or family member gets sick, loses their job, etc. There may be a situation in which you may need to take a loan. There is rules in the IRS that says how much you can take. It can only be against what's vested. You'd be taking a loan from yourself, basically. And the amount of time you have to pay it back, otherwise it becomes taxable income. But this allows for those members to take out a loan. It passed out of the House unanimously, and it also just passed out of Senate Finance this past week, so it's moving along as well. Kind of an outstanding item that's out there right now has to do with the cancer insurance plan. For several years, there's been discussion around the cancer insurance plan. There have been some administrative changes that have been made. But one of the outstanding items that has been out there is if retirees, when they get to the end of their earned time. So for every year you work, you earn a period of time in the cancer insurance plan once they retire. But at the end of that, unless you had had actual diagnosis of cancer, you can't continue in the plan. There's been individuals who would like to see that allowing retirees to opt into continuing that coverage. And so there has been a working group put together between employee groups and employer groups to try to address this situation. We've had our legal counsel as well as our tax legal counsel as well as our actuaries do some work here. There's a way to allow them to do that and have the retirees then pay for that premium moving forward. There's a way to also then kind of extract what that difference in liability would be to those new premiums and have that premium be higher than what the premium is that's already being paid by the employers across the board. And that has seemed to be the decision that the groups have decided on to make it fair and not putting liability out there on others that already are in the system. And so we don't know if we'll see a bill to that regard this year or not. If there is a bill, it will be what we call a strike everything. And so there is a potential for that, but right now that is an issue that's being worked on by the employee groups and the employer groups to help our retirees in the future.
So we're going to go through, thanks Diane for that, we're going to go through some other bills that are not being run by the Board of Trustees, but do have some interest for the system and that we watch very closely. So the first one is House Bill, and we're going to run through these very quickly, is 2034 Department of Corrections Officers Personnel System covered. Back in the early 2010s, the state government went through personnel reform and uncovered a lot of people within state government. This actually puts some Department of Corrections employees, such as correctional captains, correctional lieutenants, sergeants, corporals, officer fours, et cetera, puts them back being covered in the system. So that has an impact on the system.
House Bill 2329 was a strike everything amendment that was done, and this is to allow correctional officers who are newly employed to have a defined benefit option. Back in 2019, I believe, there was a bill that made it where all correctional officers that are newly hired only have a defined contribution plan. Surveillance officers and probation officers do have that defined benefit or defined contribution option. The sheriffs are actually leading this bill to give those correctional officers a defined benefit plan. This bill was heard in committee, but it still hasn't gone through rules in the House of Origin, which means that it is likely having a very hard road ahead. However, I would continue that discussions would continue to happen if it doesn't pass this year over the interim between the employers and the employees to try to find a solution potentially.
The next bill is House Bill 2202. This is one of the few bills that deals with the elected officials' retirement plan, which is our, as you saw from the earlier charts, is our least funded plan. A couple of years back, the legislature put an additional $60 million into the system, and that's been the only infusion into that plan. This bill would create an opportunity for the counties and the cities to pay back the state. They would pre-fund taking down the liability of that plan over a course of 10 years. It would require an initial infusion of around $600 million. As you know, the state's in a deficit situation right now, so this bill, unfortunately, has been put on hold.
Senate Bill 1414 deals with school resource officers. So one of the things in our statutes is our return to work statutes. When you retire, the IRS requires you to have a break in service, a bona fide break in service, before you come back to work. Otherwise, your retirement will be suspended. There are instances in which there are exceptions to that, fire inspectors, arson investigators, and then this would allow school resource officers to be included in that. So if a police officer retires and wants to become a school resource officer after their retirement, the IRS views that those roles are different enough to allow for that to happen. There have been several, I think, agencies that are interested in this, as well as the Department of Education, to try to find a solution for the school resource officers. And that bill did pass out of the Senate and is awaiting its committee hearing in the House.
And then Senate Bill 1667. This bill has died, but it basically, for determining eligibility for state retirement benefits, it adds for those who died by suicide, who had a diagnosis of PTSD, would be determined as killed in the line of duty, but that bill has failed.
So I'm not going to go through all of these different bills. We'll just kind of touch on an issue. Something that's out there right now that seems to be a topic of the last couple years is ESG, so environmental, social, and governance goals, and legislators trying to prohibit those from being used in determining how we invest our monies. One, we are already required by the Constitution, as well as our fiduciary statutes, to only invest in the best interest of our members. And so we only are taking into consideration those pecuniary factors, but they're trying to say what a non-pecuniary factor is, and then list a lot of these different things that open up the system to litigation. And so we have been trying to educate members about that. The first bill on this list, I will say though, House Bill 2213 did take the approach that we asked that legislator to take, and only focusing on the pecuniary factors instead of bringing all of these other factors in there. That bill was also introduced last year, and one of the senators didn't think it went far enough, who wanted to list everything out. And so we're back for round two, and I expect we'll be back for future rounds in future years as well.
Right. So you see these ESG, proxy voting, guns, abortions. This is just not playing out in Arizona. It's playing out in the 49 other states. So being an election year, it tends to put a little more gasoline on these bills. They tend to be very partisan. So if one bill does actually go out, it's usually the majority party, which is by one vote, the Republican Party right now in both the House and the Senate. So these are not bipartisan bills, and the governor, as you saw last year, vetoed 143 bills, which is an all-time record for an Arizona governor in one session. And her litmus test that she's been following must be a bipartisan bill before she will sign that. Most of these bills that you see on this list and on this page tend to only, if they do make it across the finish line, tend to be very partisan bills.
I just want to highlight one other thing. There was one sponsor on the previous page, Representative Montenegro, who had introduced one of those bills, who is willing to talk to us and said that he would be amending his bill before it moved any further. So he did hear the concerns of the systems and the members and was willing to address those in future amendments. So. And
then lastly, this is our last slide. As I noticed there was a lot of employers in here. We all deal with public records and public meetings. So we filed, since your Board of Trustees is a public body, and also the subcommittees, the local boards, as you know, they all have to be posted. They all have to follow the public records law and the public meetings law. So we also watch these very, very carefully. 2593 public records time frame, that sets up a lot quicker time frame. That public records by a public body must be produced within 5 days, and it puts out a penalty. It passed the House 48-12 day before yesterday. The public meetings comments right now, as you know, if an item is not in the call to the public in a public meeting, if the item is not on the agenda, the City Council, the Board of Supervisors, the Board of Trustees can't respond back to that. This allows a very limited way for the board or City Council or any other public body can respond back. And that passed the Senate 16-12. So that was more of a partisan bill.
And then the last two bills on there are around digital assets. So even though we have members only wanting us to focus on pecuniary factors when making investment decisions, we now have two of these referral or resolutions that also want us to look at digital assets and determine if we need to include them in our portfolio. Our investment team is very good at looking at all the different opportunities and choosing what is in the best interest of the members at this time. Those are not, but we will continue looking at all the options, but happy to answer any questions if there are any.
You guys are a great crowd on questions today. Well, thank you very much. It's been good seeing all of you and giving you a brief presentation.
Now I think you guys get a break.
I think you get a break now. Thank you.